Okay, hello everyone. In this video we are going to treat production as well as the cost of production. Remember in the preceding videos where we discussed the issue of demand and supply, we distinguish demand with supply of goods and services. So the last lecture that treats theory of consumer behavior were mainly continuations of demand analysis. If you can recall very well, we explained how consumers made their choices. We didn't talk about how goods and services were produced. So in today's class, we are going to talk about productions which reflect the quantity of goods and services that were produced and supplied to the market. It is pertinent to make a distinction to highlight the difference between production in the short run and the production in the long run. In economics, when we say short run, we are referring to period of analysis where some factors of productions are variable while the rest of the factors are fixed. The time is not sufficient for the firms to make certain adjustments to alter their scale of productions in order to increase productivity. It is only one factor, that is labor, that is assumed to be variable, while the capital plans cannot be changed within short period of time. While in the long run, we are referring to a situation whereby all factors of productions can be changed in order to alter the production techniques, either to increase the productivity or to shift the production line. So having said that, we can now continue with the analysis of production. In economics, when we say productions, we are referring to the process by which input can be organized, processed, and transformed into outputs. So production function describes the relationship between input and output. For instance, here, if we want to produce a bread, we need certain capital like wheat, human beings, that's the laborers that will work on the flour and so on and so forth. Combination of these factors can give us what? Bread. Then production in the short run, there were certain assumptions made. In the short run, it is assumed that we are having, for instance, two factors of productions, the capital. The capital in that sense includes the oven, the all necessary man-made tools that can aid productions of bread, then the labor. It is assumed that the capital is fixed while number of labor hired can be changed in order to produce certain amount of goods and services. If the producer wanted to increase production, so he can only employ more laborers. Or if he want to reduce the quantity of goods and services at that short run, then he can reduce the employment of laborers. So given that the capital is fixed, while the only variable factor seems to be what? The labor. Then we can define what's production, total production, average productions, and what? Marginal production. Total production refers to total goods and services produced at a point in time by employing the labor and the capital, while the average product is output per head, output per labor employed, while the marginal product, the marginal products is changes in outputs as a result of changes in number of laborers employed. So one concept that we usually explain in relation to production is what? Diminishing return. The law states that given by fixed capital, increment in labor, it will after a certain stage output will begin to what? Decline. Assuming that we have fixed capital, then when we keep employing more labor, productivity of each additional labor employed will not be the same as the previous laborers that you employed. Then after a certain stage, when the capital become exhaustive, to the extent that 2 laborers or 3 laborers are sharing one capital, then the productivity will decline. Then what are the graphical illustrations of marginal products and what average products, and what are their relationships? It is assumed that if marginal products is higher than average products, then average product curve will be rising. You can see that from the curve. When marginal product is rising, then average product is rising. And if marginal product is falling, then average product is also falling. So given by this analysis, the two curves must intersect, and they usually intersect at the point where the total products is steep. Now let us have a look of total products to see how those curves were related. Look at the total product curve. If you can see the shape very well, this point that I'm highlighting is the steepest part, and that's the point where the marginal product is highest. Then at this point where the total curve make the curvature change the shape, then that's the point of intersections between average products and the marginal products. And one key thing to note that a point where total product is highest, then marginal product has hit the horizontal line, is become 0. So continue employing laborers, then marginal products, the productivity of each laborers will become negative, signifying what the law of variable proportion or law of diminishing return. You can see that I draw some lines, dotted lines, the yellow lines at this point that shows the highest level of marginal products. Then a point of intersections between total products, between marginal products and the average products, signifies that after that period, then the law of diminishing return begins. Then the highest point of total products correspond to 0 marginal products. This is the explanation, so we can go through them. Then another thing that we have to explain, is the notions of return to scales. In economics, we are interested in seeing how productivity increases. So return to scale try to explain the relationship between outputs and inputs. What happens when input changes? Does output changes by the same proportions, or output changes by proportion much lower than the increase in the inputs? So that's the concept of return to scale. We say there is constant return to scale if output changes by the same proportion with the changes in inputs. And on the other hand, if the changes in inputs is less than the changes in outputs, then we have decreasing return to scale. Then the last but not the least, we say there is increasing return to scale when the proportional changes in outputs is greater than the proportional changes in input. Then we say there is return to scale. These are the return to scale when all factors of production where changes, what happens to the outputs. Then cost. There is no way in which we produce goods and services without incurring cost. Each factors of production that is employed is entitled to its own reward. The labor is entitled to salary and wages, while the capital is entitled to interest. Then the cost try to give the relationship between quantity of each of the factors employed with its own cost. In economics, the cost is entirely different with the costing concept in accounting. In economics, we usually use cost to show the alternative usage of such kind of expenses that is incurred. So, which is nothing but opportunity cost of using the money for other purpose, or the using the capital for other purpose. So one assumption that we usually make is principles of bygone, which state that if we spend money to purchase capital, then we should not consider such expenses in our future decisions, because it's a cost that has already incurred, and most of such costs are sunk. They are not reversible. There was some capital that are specifically made to produce certain goods. You cannot use it to produce another alternative goods. So if a firm cannot hire it out, then it must take into considerations of a best and effective use of such capital. So we don't usually consider sunk cost because of the principles of what bygone. Sunk costs are irrelevant. They are historic costs. So these are sunk costs, they are historical costs. Try and have a glance on them. We say fixed costs. Fixed costs are costs that has incurred by firms which doesn't changes with changes in output. For instance, cost of fixed capital, cost of building. The costs are fixed irrespective of the time frame of analysis. Once the firm spend money to purchase, to build a plant layout, then the costs remain fixed irrespective of the year in which you are making your analysis. Let's assume a factory is constructed at the cost of $100 today. Then after 2 years, the cost of such factory is still $100. It doesn't change. So you can see that the cost is fixed. It doesn't change. Then the other costs are variable costs. Variable costs are costs that varies with the quantity employed. If you employed 5 laborers, their wages is different from employing 10 laborers. 200 laborers, their wages is different from 10 laborers. So variable costs are costs that varies with the quantity of output, with the number employed. It changes. The more you employ the variable factors, then the more costlier it becomes in productivity. Then cost function. Cost function describes the relationship between what? Between output and the cost. It tries to show how cost affects output. You know, firms are profit maximizers, so in making decisions to produce goods and services, they must make sure that they produce at the least cost, so that when they sell it in the market, they can maximize their profit. Then we can now plot some diagram to see how such costs were constructed. But in the meantime, let us now look at the formulas. Total cost is equal to fixed cost plus variable cost. Then we can alternatively say that total variable cost is equal to wages times number of labor employed. Remember, in the short run, it is only labor that is variable, that can be changes. So if labor is the only factor that can be changed, then we don't consider capital in calculating total variable cost. Then average cost is the cost per unit of outputs. Then the formula is ATC all over Q, or alternatively you can say TFC plus TVC divided by Q. These are graphical illustrations of what ATC, average total cost, AVC, average variable cost, AFC, average fixed cost. Average fixed cost is constant. Average variable cost is U-shaped. ATC is equal to AVC plus AFC. So the fixed cost components with the variable cost components yield the U-shape of average average total cost. Then the marginal cost is the cost that changes as a result of additional unit of what's outputs. Then the formula is change in total cost divided by change in outputs. Then we can plot all the curves. Marginal cost cuts the average total cost at the lowest point, signifying the low diminishing returns. And also marginal cost is what is U-shaped. You can see that the marginal cost is U-shaped. So what's the relationship between ATC and the TVC? That's total cost and total variable cost. You can see total fixed cost is what is constant, while average fixed cost is diminishing because more outputs are spread. When more output is produced, then the average cost of fixed cost reduces. That's why you can see that it's a little bit downward sloping towards increment of productivity, while the total fixed cost is constant. Then total variable cost, it changes with the changes in output, while total cost is additions of total variable cost and the total fixed cost. That's why it started at exactly total fixed cost. So we can now draw some lines to see how the shapes were interacted between total fixed cost and the average fixed cost with marginal cost. The lowest level of marginal cost correspond to the point where the total fixed costs or total variable cost change their curvature, and the lowest average total cost is a point that shows that marks the beginning of diminishing returns. Then thereafter, marginal cost is higher than total cost or average total cost. Then that's point that correspond to marginal productivity of negative or zero. So what's happened to long run cost? Long run cost, these are the relationship. The long run average cost is also U-shaped, while the long run marginal cost cuts the long run average cost at the lowest point. You can see that the U-shaped long run average cost. These are interesting diagrams. It's good that you take your time to understand them very well, because we are going to make use of them in explaining theory of market structure. So it is also relevant to make certain explanations on how producers maximize their revenue. There were two things that determines how revenue can be maximized. First thing is firms try to minimize the cost of production, or they maximize the productivity. So in making these decisions of maximizing the cost of productions, maximizing the productivity or minimizing the cost of productions, they do so in taking into consideration with ISO cost and ISO cont. ISO costs are nothing but issues relating to how cost of productions limits or hinders firms from employing maximum number of factor inputs that can be combined all together to produce goods and services. While ISOCONT refers to quantity of goods and services that can be employed, combinations of employment of, let's say, labor and the capital that yield the same productivity. So at the point where ISOCONT and the ISOCOST are interchanged, then that point shows maximizations of outputs. So next video we are going to highlight the ISOCONT, the ISOCOST in details, and so also we move to theory of market structure. So I sent the slides on the online portal. You can go there and download it, watch the video. Thereafter, I'm going to communicate with you so that we chat. If there were any questions that you have, I'm going to respond on the questions. So until then, goodbye. See you next week. Thank you.